So this is the big message from this paper, that the 2023 anticipatory action was a record level of early preparedness, but still it was just a preparation for what could happen with El Nino and IOD in Somalia, such as we saw in 1997. So first, I will be taking you through our work here before looking ahead to 2026. And then, as Modathir said, we'll talk about our plans for further dissemination with a policy brief. So some background on the climate side for Somalia. So El Nino is well known to have a link with East Africa, but the critical factor is the Indian Ocean dipole. El Nino is generally associated with Indian Ocean dipole, positive events, but it's only when those events are triggered that we see the biggest impacts on rainfall. You can see a picture of a positive Indian Ocean dipole event here with warmer sea surface temperatures in the west, leading to deep convection and uplift of the atmosphere. So when we see both those events, not just the El Nino, but the PIOD as well, it's then we expect the most significant rainfall. And that's what we saw in 2023, and it's what we saw in 1997. Just a quick outlook at 2026, and the reason why we're here is right now, we've no doubt seen there's a very strong chance of a El Nino. The latest forecasts show 81% chance of a very strong El Nino during the Dare season, during October to December, which would make this one of the largest El Nino events in the historical record. And we also have some indication that the positive IOD is likely to develop. But we have to acknowledge that there's still uncertainty in the strength and timing of this, and it's still possible that a neutral IOD event would occur. But to our paper, we looked at all of the different climate states during the Dare season, during October to December since 1981, and we see only 1997 have both the El Nino and PIOD. These are shown in the top right-hand corner, this purple. There were some events, some seasons which saw strong El Nino without the PIOD, 2015, 1982, and we saw some which only had PIOD, like 2019. Now, the corresponding rainfall for each of these events is shown on the right. This is an area exceedance plot. So the lines here are showing the area, the height of the line is the area receiving at least, area of Somalia receiving at least that amount of rainfall. So hopefully you instantly see this purple line, dark purple line for 1997 is way above all of the other lines. This is telling us that the area of receiving these very high rainfall thresholds of 600, 800 millimeters, or even over 1,000 millimeters in the season, the area was much greater in 97 compared to other years. We see 1997 as the outlying rainfall. 2023 was still very, very high, very extreme. It was number 2 to 97, but still 1997 was well beyond. A few other features to note from this, we see 2019 with only a PIOD without an El Nino was roughly number 3. It was a very wet. So this is showing out PIOD is the critical factor that drives the extreme rainfall, because we can look at events like 2015, which at the time was called a Godzilla El Nino, but didn't trigger a PIOD, and you can just about see this light orange line of the PIOD on the right-hand side, which is showing that the rainfall was wetter than normal, but it was nothing like we saw in 23, and certainly nothing like we saw in 1997. This is showing us that a very, very strong El Nino alone is generally not sufficient for a very wet season in Somalia. It is this PIOD which is critical. We turn now to our two events, 97 and 23. These are the two climate conditions which are the only time we've seen these PIOD and El Nino, and this is what we're expecting this year. Both of these events were extreme rainfall, but 1997 was much heavier. And in our paper, we considered what happened in each of these seasons. We look in detail at the timeline of the rainfall accumulation, which is in the solid lines and dashed line here, as well as the mortality estimates, which we have from daily records of humanitarian reporting from 1997, which are the red dots here. And alongside that, we see key moments in the impacts. Notably here, the first action, humanitarian action in 97, was in the first few weeks of November, when the ICRC delivered the first emergency aid, when the floodwaters had already risen, when the rainfall had already fallen. And it continued to get worse. And as you can see, soon after that point, mortality estimates rapidly increased. Typical impacts is a long narrative of these impacts in our paper, but we saw villages washed away, people stranded in trees for weeks, and surrounding water infested with crocodiles and hippos. So the impacts cross-referenced across multiple sources of information showed a extremely unprecedented level of flooding in this 1997. We don't have satellite data for that period that's reliable, but it's clear that from the level of impacts they were vast. And critically, there was no early action. The potential to forecast was in its infancy, and the warnings, whilst there were some warnings floating around, they certainly didn't trigger any significant early action. By contrast, we turn to 2023. In 2023, we have a map here of showing the extent of a lot of the early action which was taken before the flooding started. Overall, we estimate there was $24 million of money spent on anticipation, which was a record for a single season. And we can see some of the anticipation in the rough areas which it occurred in the map, including SODMA, working with WFP, spending a significant investment in early action, focusing on the Juba-Shabelle basin and the riverine areas, which were most strongly affected in this season. The flooding extent is shown by this dark blue, and you can see some of the types of impacts shown on the left: protecting water points, protecting livelihoods, protecting property, restocking medical centres, rehabilitating riverbank breakages. And this anticipatory action, it covered all the right places. It was a very effective and well-targeted plan for anticipatory action, which was coordinated between some institutions, many working in parallel, aware of what others were doing, but working independently to implement anticipatory action in existing project areas. But overall, this was a success. We can see this similar timeline for 2023 with a strong increase in rainfall, not as much as 97, with a much lower mortality rate. We see the mortality rising in the end to some uncertainty in the numbers, but 188 is the highest figure we found, compared to over 2,000 in 97. The critical difference here was the huge amount of things happening before the rainfall started. We can see the Garkov forecast being released as a critical point of information, which triggered many anticipatory actions. But also there was awareness before that point of late August, and people preparing and deciding and planning what to do in the event of flooding, designing triggers where they weren't already set up, planning information flows and protocols for what to do when the flooding occurred. So there was a significant amount of AEA compared to 1997, and different evidence on the effectiveness from different sources widely showed huge benefits: greater clarity in planning, better use of resources in advance, financially efficient to do all the planning ahead and purchase supplies and pre-position supplies before crisis mode hit. and allowing ultimately earlier post-flood support due to those pre-positioned supplies, with reduction shown in small-scale evaluation studies, reduction in emergency coping mechanisms and improved food security outcomes. So we can see evidence this AA was effective and widely anecdotally reported as well, not just quantitatively, but people involved in the AA felt that this was incredibly effective. But we come to this question of mortality, where we saw a much, much lower level of mortality in 2023. And a critical question we address is, can we attribute that drop to the AA? Was the AA responsible for the lower mortality? Our answer to that question is negative, because we come back to this rainfall. We see that the physical size of the rainfall hazard was just an incredibly greater magnitude in 1997. We see on the same kind of plot as before on the left, which shows when we look at these really extreme thresholds, like 800 millimeters of rainfall across the season, there was a small amount of area in 23 which saw that 800 millimeters. It was many times that area in 1997. And furthermore, if we look at even more extreme, like 1,000 millimeters of rainfall, that was never seen in 2023. It's never seen in any other year, and yet 50,000 square kilometers were seen experiencing 1,000 millimeters of rainfall in 97. In our work, we contrast that. We look at the exposure of population to this rainfall. We can't directly look at inundation, the people living in inundated areas, because we don't have comparable satellite data in 97. But when we just look at the population living in an area receiving a certain amount of rainfall, we find, despite the fact that the population has more than doubled, many more people were living in extreme rainfall areas in 1997, despite the fact the population was half. We can look at these thresholds of 600 millimeters, where more than 2 million more people saw that rainfall in 97, and all the way up to 1,000 millimeters, where there were 500,000 people who lived in areas receiving 1,000 millimeters. This level of rainfall is difficult to make an exact match between seasonal rainfall thresholds and the risk to life, but it's not difficult to see that 1,000 millimeters of rainfall is going to lead to extremely high risk to life, especially when people have low coping capacity already. So this is 500,000 people. This is 500,000 people living in these areas. So when we contrast that with the difference in mortality, which was of the order 2,000, we find that this rainfall difference is more than sufficient to explain the difference in mortality. So we conclude that we can't directly attribute the AA. We can't attribute the difference in mortality to the AA, but while at the same time we maintain that the AA was extremely effective, and it did prevent significant damage to livelihoods, as well as some impact on reducing risk to life. So this was our research paper. So this is what we found in our research, and we called this a dress rehearsal, because we find that though the AA was effective, it may not be enough to meet the challenge of a 1997 level event. We submitted this research paper for peer review in the journal Disasters earlier this year. And however, that normally we would leave it there with an academic paper. We would wait for the reviews to come back, and we would deal with any reviewer comments, and then ultimately it would be published as a peer-reviewed paper. However, that process can take up to a year. So if we waited for that to come out, we would not be seeing this paper publicly available until sometime after the deer season this year. Thus, the emerging El Nino triggered us to release this as a preprint. in order to disseminate the message before the season. So what that means is this paper is now live. The research is out there, uploaded. It's not yet peer reviewed, but it's out there so that we can spread this message and inform the people that need to know about it. Because the critical messaging from this, relevant for decision making now, is that if we prepare expecting it to be like 2023, we may be badly wrong. If the PIOD emerges, combined with a climate change warming, which intensifies rainfall.
in advance kan dambe 6000 way la socotaa amal bank information.
Sorry, I didn't.
Can you mute yourself, Maria? Thank you.
Sorry, I wasn't clear if that was a question, but so if we combine this, if we plan for 2023, we may be badly wrong. It may, if we saw 1997, then the level of AA may not be sufficient to deal with that threat. Furthermore, in a warmer world, where the atmosphere is warmer, it has capacity for more moisture, then individual rainstorms can be more intense. So if we have a 1997 level event plus an additional 0.7 degrees of warming, then the rainstorms that occur could be unprecedented, and the seasonal totals could exceed what we saw in 1997. So we felt this messaging was sufficient to pre-release this paper as a preprint and with a one-pager policy brief to follow, which we can review in a minute. So this is our paper, and I thought before we turn to the policy brief, I would quickly bring us up to speed on the latest forecasts for 2026, anticipating the DARE season. Now, I already mentioned there's a chance of a very strong El Nino, and we are no doubt, we've all been hearing a lot about the strong El Nino. I even heard it called a Godzilla El Nino again. And all this warning is exactly right, exactly exactly following from the science, the forecast models. This is what you're seeing is the latest update issued in mid-July, showing particularly for the October to December season, the height of the bar is giving the probability of an El Nino of different categories. And you can see it's almost 100% probability of at least a strong El Nino and 80% chance of a very strong El Nino. This would place it in the same comparison as 1997 and certainly 2023. And the forecasts for El Nino have never looked this confident for a very strong El Nino. But returning to the PIOD, and this is the critical factor, the forecasts are they tend to be much more uncertain for this event. There's not as much predictability for the IOD. Typically, the IOD doesn't emerge, and when it occurs, it doesn't emerge till around September or August. And the model forecasts are always relatively uncertain. The latest forecast is shown in the plot, and the height of the line is showing the strength of the IOD. And you can see that there are model simulations above and below the PIOD threshold. Whether above, they're pointing to a PIOD, and below something which is not quite reaching that threshold or even a neutral state. So if we look at the end of the period, so October through centered on November, most of the simulations at that point are above the threshold. So models are pointing that most likely we see a PIOD. There's still a possibility that the PID won't emerge. And that level of certainty may improve as we get forecast updates in August, going into the Garkov forecast. However, they may still remain relatively uncertain. Currently, the IOD is not active. We wouldn't expect it to be active at this point of the year. And we may not know if we're with 100% certainty if we're going to get a PIOD until we're in late August, even into September. So this PID is a critical factor, but otherwise there's a strong signal now. because if we look at these models and we look directly at the rainfall forecasters, we can look at the latest forecasts for extreme rainfall season. We can see a map of Africa here. The bigger plot here is focusing on the forecast for the DS26, with the color of the shading indicating the probability of a more than a 1 in 5 year return period event. That means an event which is wetter than 80% of the historical record. So it's a very wet season. And the colors here show across nearly all of Somalia, including Somaliland, but slightly lower in Puntland, but certainly central South Somalia, and indeed the wider Juba Shebele Basin into Kenya and Ethiopia. All of these are showing a strong signal for this event. This is a 50 to 70% chance. So we're looking at an event which is normally 20% likelihood. This is 3 times more likely than normal. And the signal is widespread and it's strong. We can compare this to what we saw for DARE 2023 at the same time of the year. And this is the smaller plot. And you can note this, we saw the same level of probability for central South Somalia, but the wider region was less confident. It was still double the normal chance, but the signal was weaker, particularly in the north of Somalia, particularly in those northern regions where in the fact the rainfall wasn't as strong as in the central south. In 23, the signal was weaker there. But now across the whole of Somalia in 2026, across all regions, the signal is for a very wet season is strong. We have been, I'm not sure I've seen confidence in seasonal forecasts, which is this high ever, anywhere. So this is really a signal. If it was confident enough to act in 2023, it's certainly confident enough to act now. So that's all I have, Modathir, and then I'm happy to turn to the policy brief. But I'm happy to maybe we could pause for any questions and deal with any comments at this point. I'm happy to open up the floor.
Thank you very much, Dr. David. Let us go to the white paper and then we take at the end all the questions, or if there is any comment or feedback, we can take it at the end. Maybe you can go directly to present the white paper. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you. Certainly. So there's the white paper. So we're calling it a policy brief here. So this is what we wanted to do, as well as our preprint, was release a simpler communication of this that we can share and encourage the right people to, hopefully the right people can see it and encourage more attention on AA for Somalia and indeed scaling up funding. So we've written a white paper. This is what you're seeing on the screen is the latest draft. This is not the final piece, and just to clarify that the logos are currently to be added, but this is our draft. And what it is it's simply one page, a briefing on our paper results in the context of 2026 and advocating for a scale up of anticipatory financing. And we have key messages. This is what we've been saying here, focusing on number one, that the fact that this year could bring unprecedented flooding to Somalia. But number two, to say that we shouldn't be planning for another 23. 97 was far more extreme, and climate change raises the stakes. A warmer atmosphere holds more moisture, which intensifies rainfall. So we can expect an event could be comparable or exceeding 1997, and that could have an unprecedented humanitarian consequences. And then the third point here is to focus on the real positive story that AA did work in 23. It was effective and cost effective, but the challenge is greater in 26. Not just the increased level of potential rainfall hazard and flooding, but the larger context of financing. Since, although we've had significant improvements in forecasting, notably at ICPAC in flood forecasting since 23, the context of humanitarian funding is much worse. Since 23, the funding has fallen by almost a third, and it's currently at its lowest level in a decade. And at the same time, costs are increasing. And I'm sure many are well aware of this, that the disruption to regional supply chains associated with the closure of the Strait of Hormuz due to the conflict in the region, these operational costs have increased. And so combined with the, in general, lack of funding, leave the humanitarian capacity under severe pressure. Now, under financial constraints, this means that AA is even more critical, because we know that AA can be much more cost effective than response. So if we can scale up AA, that means we can hopefully take some of the pressure off the need for response when it happens. But the critical message here is that it's not just about scaling up funding. The systems need to be able to rapidly deliver that funding, need to be able to absorb that extra money to build capacity. So this is where we come to recommendations. Our recommendations here are to scale up flexible financing now. This is exactly the right time, and to invest in delivery capacity to absorb that funding. And finally, and critically, this is a really important thing. I'm glad to talk to Sodma here. This action needs to be to work at scale and ensure full coverage. This needs to be coordinated and needs to be led by the government, working in partnership to deliver a comprehensive AA support. And this is not to say that this is not already happening, but I think we can, if we can ramp this up, if we can ensure that all actors are working together, then to target the most at-risk locations with full coverage of not just primary risks of flooding, but the cascading risks to food security and health, then working in the partnership with scaled-up funding, this gives the best chance to deliver comprehensive support and indeed prevent a humanitarian crisis. So now is the time to match the preparedness with the resources. So this is our one-pager, and this is ICPAC joining us for the one-pager, and we're looking to across our authorship team. We're just finalising institutional approval to badge this, and indeed we're very open for anyone any institution who would like to be involved in this messaging. But we're open to badging this with other institutions, and we will certainly be sharing it across our networks. The plan, and I'll finish this here before turning to questions. Our plan is to release this imminently, likely over this weekend, ready for Monday, on Relief Web. So we'll have a home there, and then through the regional technical working group on AA, and then onward from there. So we're very pleased to have this opportunity to brief the participants here now, and very happy to take any questions, and looking forward to discussions and onwards with this. So with that, I will pass back to Modathir, and I can stop sharing my screen. Right, maybe I'll leave my screen on so people can keep reading if they want.
Thank you very much, Dr. David, for this excellent and informative presentation, and also thank you for presenting this policy paper. Allow me also to thank the different experts that we have today in our meeting. We have the director of SODMA, we have several senior staff from the Ministry of Water Somalia, we have team from WFP Somalia, and we have the head of the DRM unit, and we have several experts from Reading University and other organizations. Thank you all for coming to this important virtual session. Allow me now please to open the floor for the discussion, for your question, for your feedback, for your comments. The floor is yours, so Paul. Please raise your hand and I will give you the floor. Thank you. Yes, Abdul Latif, go ahead. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Modathir. Thanks, Dr. David, for the very nice presentation. I don't know if you can hear me very well online.
Loud and clear. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Okay, thank you. It's a really interesting presentation, and I just have like maybe three or four questions, but I mean, yeah, we can just take them one by one and see. Um, so first of all, maybe regarding the ENSO analysis, I mean, we're like talking much more on about a very strong El Nino, but I just wanted to understand if you try to consider, to use like a relative ENSO index like the one that was done recently by ECMWF to see, because I mean, when we look at just the normalized ENSO index, it's not taking into account the effect of global warming, and then it does tend to show us all the time that we have like a much stronger El Nino over the years, and maybe and weaker La Nina. So I don't know if you try to look at these relative ENSO index so that at least you have an idea of the global warming effect as well. That's my first question. And I don't know, I can throw all the questions, or if you want just to take them one by one, that's with you fine as well.
Go ahead. Go ahead.
Yeah, okay. So my second question is regarding the analysis, because I saw the exposure analysis on one of the slides, which is comparing 1997 and 2023. So I want to understand to what extent you have separated, the effect of changes in rainfall from the effect of changes in population distribution, for instance. But because but also like a population growth, in Somalia. So that will help also to understand the difference in exposure, which is driven by the hadar from the one which is driven by the changes in population or density, etc. Then my third one is also regarding this rainfall. These curves that you showed. I don't know if you can come back on that slide with comparing rainfall and then the area. Yes, this one, yeah. Yeah, because I see here like you have it over the years, but I also want to understand if you are taking also into account like the changes in land surface, hydrological condition over time, because I mean those things can also have like impact on the change. So you may have like a lot of rains in 1997, but that will have completely like a different impact on people than the one that you will have in, I don't know, in 2018 or in 2023. Yeah.
Yeah,
Yes, that's all. Yeah, that's all.
Thank you, Abdul. Yeah, thank you very much for those questions. Yeah, very, very good questions. I will maybe I'll take the third question first, because I have the slide on the screen. So this analysis doesn't take anything else into account beyond rainfall, because we have there was obviously, as you say, there's land surface is critical in how that rainfall turns into flood risk, particularly in riverine systems. And there are other factors which are going to drive the risk, such as soil moisture can increase the risk of flash flooding. But then changes in the river, in the topography, in the river structure, can increase or decrease the risk of actual inundation. We didn't have the ability to measure inundation directly with satellite estimate, which is why we stick with a general estimate of rainfall. because there were elements of river breakages is one of the key factors which came up. The idea that where the riverbanks have been broken deliberately in order to access the water in the river, but for example from livestock, those breakages when the floodwaters come can hugely exacerbate inundation. So the existence of those breakages and the fixing of those is something which is going to be a control on whether or not the high rainfall actually leads to significant inundation in a particular area. So no, we didn't include any of that because we couldn't, because the availability, there's good availability on this kind of data now for 23, but 1997, the ability to quantify those kind of effects are incredibly limited. So we just focus on a very broad measure of rainfall, and we use this just to show that the rainfall itself it's extremely higher in 97. We looked across different rainfall data sets, and we looked across Somalia area and also the Juba Shabelle Basin area. But in all cases, this conclusion stands exactly as it is, that the rainfall was so much higher. Maybe in going to your question previously on rainfall and population. So here we took the world estimates of gridded estimates of population, and we essentially put these to the same area as the rainfall, and we counted the people living in a certain rainfall exceedance area. So we took the area receiving 800 millimeters in each of the years and summed the estimated population living in that area. So there are uncertainties, and we discussed that paper. There's certainly uncertainties with these population estimates, notably that they're roughly synchronous in time, but the estimates are from 2000 for 97 and 2020 from 23. So they don't take into account any changes between those times, and they particularly don't take into account any migratory effects on a smaller scale. And certainly since 2020, there was a significant drought in the region. So there may have been much movement of people. So there's an uncertainty, but we use the population here as a very, very broad measure of the difference between them. And in fact, the difference in the level of rainfall cuts across this uncertainty in the population, because if we look at this extreme level of 1,000 millimeters, we find that this just wasn't seen in 23. So we can use any population estimate we like in 23. If there's huge uncertainty in the estimate, we still know that there was no people living in an area which saw 1,000 millimeters, because the rainfall was just simply so much higher. And then maybe finally turning to the relative El Nino index. Yes, this is a known feature of El Nino, that if we use the traditional index because of the climate change warming, then we can seem to get more stronger El Ninos. So they have this relative index, the relative oceanic Nino index, and this is what these warnings are considering here. So when we look ahead to this OND, we are already looking at this relative index, which is taking out the effect of global warming. So our anticipation of this very strong El Nino index is not purely a methodological artifact, because the background warming, this has already taken that into account.
Thank you, Dr. David.
That's useful.
Thanks so much.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. David. Also, thank you, Modathir, for the good questions. Yes, Idris, please go ahead. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Dr. David and Dr. Modathir. This is indeed a very good paper. Just in preparation for the anticipated current El Nino season, what does the paper identify as the main preparedness gaps that remain in 2023 or from the 1997, despite the scale of anticipatory action? Maybe also to aid into our preparations for the current forecasted El Nino situation. Thank you.
Yes, it's a very good question. In terms of the gaps in the AA system, I mean, I know we do have. So my background is in climate science, coordinate this paper and had experience in there, but I'm not a humanitarian practitioner. So I'm aware we do have other co-authors who with more of that experience on the call. I'm very happy to let them come in. But from my perspective and what we wrote in the paper is that the AA was very good, and we don't have strong criticisms of it. More that the scale of the challenge is just so much greater. I think the areas maybe to improve are coordination. Some agencies worked based on existing pilot regions. They were already working in an area, so they wanted to do some AA in that area, which was maybe not the most at-risk area. It was not necessarily guided by the strongest risk, but rather than the easiest implementation. Agencies there was strong collaboration in some agencies, but many they had their plans and they did what they wanted, and what transpired was a strong coverage and a good spatial coverage. But perhaps there could be, as ever, more coordination between agencies could support cost-effective and collaboration. Some agencies, even though they had the seasonal forecast, still felt that they were coming to it a little bit late and were slightly scrabbling for setting up information streams and knowing which forecast to be looking at. And that will, with institutional memory, I would hope that should improve now. But already at this point in July, we can already have the time to set that up. So hopefully by the degree of last minute preparation will be less this season, but more coordination, earlier planning, and there was some different use of shorter term forecasts. So in this case, we're just looking at the seasonal forecast, and then in most cases, agencies were, as we went into the season, were basing their shorter term triggering and day-to-day planning based on shorter range forecasts. So flood forecasts from GLOFAST and from the Google Flood Hub, and rainfall forecasts from ICPAC, as well as from other sources. So people were using whatever seemed best to them. Perhaps there is improvements to be made in a more harmonized consideration of which forecast sources people are triggering on and sharing information during the season. But yeah, there's some reflections there, and we go into some more detail in the paper. But yeah, I'm happy to, if anyone on the call has other comments on this, as I know there's much experience on the call on the ground.
Thank you very much, Dr. David. Let us take a question from Christoph, and then we'll take a question by Khidr. Khidr, I see you raised your hand, but then you lower it again. So we'll take the question as the second question. Then finally, we'll take again Abdul Latif. Please go ahead, Christoph, and then Khidr, and then Abdul Latif. Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you very much. I hope you can hear me well. This is Christoph Bade from the World Food Programme Global Headquarters. So understanding that the risk of severe rainfall during the OND season is very high based on sort of a seasonal outlook, a challenge that I see from a practitioner's perspective is basically translating that seasonal and regional outlook into a forecast that is location specific enough and has a high or sufficiently high probability of detection to enable anticipatory action in specific locations. And I think this is also, Dr. David, what you're speaking to when you're saying that certain actors may favor locations for implementation that they have ongoing projects in, because usually considering funding and the risk of acting in vain, so to speak, leads agencies' investments in where to do anticipatory action, especially when going about it for the first time. With all that context provided, I wonder if you did look at all at sort of also capacity to take the seasonal sort of regional information and to translate them into more location specific triggers, or what is needed to kind of close the gap between sort of a sort of prediction for Somalia and one that tells me that Buluboto or Jova is going to be flooding. Thank you very much. I hope my question is clear.
Yeah, many thanks. Yeah, it's very clear. Thanks, Christoph. Yeah, I mean this is the challenge here, and this is where the operational desire for targeted information comes up against the limits of predictability from the science. The predictable signal, the seasonal signal we have right now, is as precise as you can see with this red blob on the screen. This is all we can say at this time when we think about the risk of extreme rainfall. We can't pinpoint the rainfall any more precise than that. To get that level of precision, we have to wait until we're a week ahead of the event. When we look at these next week forecasts, that's when we get the signal that we can have some precision in the rainfall. But that's not to say that we can't be a little bit more precise about possible impacts. Whilst the rainfall could be anywhere and indeed everywhere, the impacts are reasonably assumed to follow the historical pattern, particularly so riverine flooding, Juba and Shebele. We have a very strong high population around these rivers, and the long-term risk map of inundation in those areas is a good start for estimating where these impacts are likely to be felt the most. I know that IOM and FAO Swalim have recently for this season produced an estimate of flood risk inundation by taking that historical flood risk impact and then adding a buffer zone with an assumption that the rainfall will be bigger, with a very rough assumption of increasing that size, but giving a wider envelope for possible impacts. Now, it's a bit rough, but that's all the precision I think we can have at this timescale. We certainly can't be much more precise than that. But certainly, I think the big difference in planning compared to thinking about impacts since last time in 23 is that we do see a much greater signal in the north of the region, when previously there was anticipatory action happening in the north, although the signal wasn't as strong. But now we do see a much bigger signal. So I think this warrants a much closer focus as well on the north, where there's less, not a strong riverine flooding area. We have small-scale rivers, so much more flash flooding, which is more difficult to predict at those longer lead times. The seasonal prediction is still the same level of confidence, but there we'd want to be looking at the individual rainfall forecasts at 1 to 2 weeks lead, and it's only at that stage we can really get those more precise from the science, that precise signal to guide action. So in the seasonal, I would say this seasonal forecast, this is all about preparedness. This is not yet able to tell us exactly should we act in this flood-prone region or that flood-prone region, but this is a general signal to ramp up the funding and put the plans in place to make sure that we're ready to act in anywhere that we do see the flooding, and certainly going in and supporting the flood preparedness in areas where we're almost certain, repairing riverbanks and some of the many activities described in the paper, but also within the operational expertise of the people in the room.
Thank you, Dr.
Thanks.
David. Let us go to Khidir, the director of SODMA. The director of SODMA, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Modathir, and thank you, colleagues, and especially thanks to Dr. David and his team for compiling all this evidence-based and what I can say is that this has come the right time, actually, the right time, so it could inform our decisions in the process of coordinating and, of course, preparing for the El Nino, for the upcoming El Nino. Of course, yes, the death you have also mentioned has been very minimal based on what happened compared to what happened around. And at the time, actually, we were. Can you hear me? Can you all hear me, please?
Yes, we can hear you.
Yes.
Although there is some
Anyway,
background, but
okay.
we can hear you.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Of course, the death has been small. It has been around estimated around 118. But yes, you captured and you spoke about that. But I wonder why the paper did not capture the loss and damage in general, because there are available instruments. I mean, there are available resources, document resources, which the government has developed the rapid post-disaster, post-flood assessment at the time, and of course, which estimated the loss incurred by the different sectors is, of course, recorded there. That's one thing we could at least also compare to maybe the future flood, maybe if it takes place in 2026. On the other hand, back then at the time, yes, you said about coordination. Yes, coordination has been a bit lagging behind, but it was not from the government actually, but it was it was by nature actually. It was by default because the coordination aspect of the AA at the time was not that much stronger like it is now. Of course, we have, as you have mentioned, some interventions were made where floods were not also impacting. Yes, and to tell you the truth, yes, we knew that one, and it out of the cycle of the coordination. It was inside the coordination, and of course, the agencies footprint in the have been reporting what asset is what they possessed at the time, so and where they have been doing the interventions. But those interventions that have happened outside the areas where floods did not impact were because of the projects that were ongoing at the time with the components of course crisis modifiers they had. Of course, it was actually it was earmarked a fund that could not be, of course, allocated somewhere else. So we let them do the work because that was anticipatory action at the time. So maybe and the focus at the time, the mistake that also the government and partners did at the time was that our focus was mainly on the riverine and not the flash flood potential impacted areas. And what we have learned was that the flash flood has impacted huge area, even bigger, wider than the riverine locations where our focus was. So that was one thing that will not, of course, repeated at this time. And of course, the planning has already started at the government level now. So once the government at the top of the Office of Prime Minister, so we've been convening today two meetings, two El Nino preparedness meeting among the interministerial and the Office of Prime Minister together. And of course, we are somewhere now, and we will be convening other meetings, other coordination meetings with partners, with our UN team here in Mogadishu, the international organizations and the local organizations. So that is where we are now. We are not actually sitting and relaxing. Actually, we are doing all we could do at the regional level. Actually, ICPAC level, yes, we will not wait. The GACO, actually, we've already started a conversation with them, and of course, we will, of course, convene another meeting with them under the framework of Scala, and that is also another level which our coordination will, of course, take place. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Director of SODMA, Sheikh Khidr. The floor is yours, Dr. David.
Yeah, many thanks. I mean, it's very, it's wonderful to hear that, and as expected, Sodma very engaged and already working to prepare for this El Nino. Very interesting to learn about your findings of flash flood being more widespread than anticipated. I think this is a part of anticipatory action, which is a challenge because these short-term forecasts can be much more uncertain. So I think certainly with ICPAC and other support, that improving those forecasts of the short-term rainfall and indeed the nowcasting using satellite rainfall to give really strong imminent risk of flooding. I think there's potential there. I know there's already a service called FASTA, which is giving short-term warning of where storm systems are. I think some of this nowcasting information, there's potential to incorporate this into early warning, but it needs to get to people very, very quickly. And yeah, maybe very quickly on your point of looking at impacts beyond mortality, you're absolutely right. In our paper, we did review some of the impacts of the event, but we focused on the mortality as this was our best point of comparison with 1997, where the scale of the impacts was sometimes difficult to quantify in a way that was comparable. I mean, there were many other things with 97 where we discussed the relative differences in vulnerability as well. Naturally, a very different context in the country in 97 compared to 23. So a lot of the comparisons were quite difficult, but we focused there on mortality. But indeed, as you rightly say, there is next year after this event, there will be another opportunity for learning to see how the 26 compares to 23, because in this case, as SODMA already having information about the scale of impact in 23, we will no doubt have the same level of understanding for 26, and so this would be a very good opportunity to dig into this and learn from the hydrological side, from the social impact side, and from the humanitarian response side. How whatever happens in DARE 26, we can keep going and keep learning and keep building further forward into the future, because extreme rainfall is not going away, and we need to continually work together to improve our readiness for it. So thank you. I'd be very, very keen to collaborate going forward. And thanks. Over to you, Modathir.
Thank you very much, Sheikh Khidr and Dr. David. Let us take the last question by Modathir. Please go ahead.
Yeah. Thank you, Modathir, and thanks, Dr. David. Yes, I heard you talking about the difficulties we have in predicting of flooding over much early time, but because for me, when I look at this analysis that you have done, by comparing 97 and 2023 through the lens of El Nino and positive IOD strength, I mean, I just trying to understand, I mean, because I think there is also like a data available now when it comes, for instance, to look at east-west circulation. I mean, talking about like Walker cells and or maybe just to throw like the MGO in that area, knowing that phase 2, phase 3 can be on on the Indian Ocean and through Somalia region, so that may at least help us to gain 2-3 weeks, before some of the extreme rainfall event may occur in that area. So I don't know if this is something that you have maybe you looked at already, or it's something that you can also look at through this analysis. Yeah. I understand the uncertainty, but yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, yeah. And there is, you're exactly right. So the IOD is working, impacting through its influence on the Walker cell. But the MJO, Madden-Julian oscillation, this is indeed another really strong driver of the sub-seasonal variability. And we have done previous work, which was focused more over Kenya, but this was looking at the relationship between MJO and the week-to-week variability. When we saw there that there was a very strong relationship, indeed, as you say, around phase 3 MJO, which is predictable at up to 2 weeks lead, even 3 weeks. So there is the evidence base to support the rainfall forecasts at that lead time, that the signals we would see to identify where exactly within the season we would expect a particularly strong rainfall weeks. There is predictability there. So the currently available forecast, I believe, so ICPAC produced a week ahead forecast of the extreme rainfall over the next week. The scientific basis is there to support extension of those lead times. The week 2 forecasts are available from global producers, but I think that's certainly something which could open the door to increased capacity for anticipatory action. And on these particular seasons, we didn't look in detail at the sub-seasonal drivers of the variability, but we do know from previous work that it's likely that the MGO may have had an effect and may have offered windows to anticipate where exactly in the season we are going to experience the strongest rainfall events. But yes, certainly thanks for the great question.
Thank you very much. Let us take one more question from Sheikh Khidr, the director of SODMA. Dr. Khidr, Sheikh Khidr, the floor is yours.
Yeah, thank you, Modathir. And I come back. Of course, I remembered something about fund flexibility. Of course, in case where the El Nino will not affect, or maybe the focus is strongly mentions that area will not be affected by the El Nino rains or El Nino floods, then and there are ongoing projects there by different agencies, and of course, if there is a fund in hand with them that is earmarked for that area and is under project or something, so we recommend that the flexibility should come from the donors, so they could allow those funds could be used where matter most actually. So in the white paper, in the recommendation area, if you could capture some line like that, we would be glad to, of course, have that one. The second thing, did you investigate if a tropical cyclone will be coupling with this El Nino IOD phenomena? So that would make worse in the northeastern part of the country, just like 2019. 2019, we've had a huge flood and coupled with a tropical cyclone. I think 2 tropical cyclones have occurred in just in of course 2020. So those storms, would they be subject to this phenomena? That's the question that I was. Thank you.
Yes, many thanks. So on the first question, I've just brought up the white paper again. I think yes, so that's a great addition there. This idea of that funding should be flexible to be used in a way that's responsive to the event. And we have got the word flexible in the anticipatory financing, but I can see that that's an important point there. Because well, maybe I should point out in cases where the previously the funding was earmarked for specific areas, and so was the anticipatory action occurred in those areas and not necessarily in the highest risk areas. The action that were taken were generally still low regret and still worthwhile actions to support communities. But I can see that it would be beneficial to be able to use the resources in a way that's unconstrained by situations which are not taking into account this event. And then on your question about tropical cyclones, yes, indeed. So we did have a tropical cyclone in 2019 in December, I believe, and then in 2020 in November. So there is a possibility of tropical cyclones. There's no indication that there's not going to be any. Of course, they're relatively rare compared to other parts of the world, but it's quite plausible that there would be a tropical cyclone during this season. I don't think there's any reason to rule it out. Of course, at this lead time, there's very little predictability, I believe, in certainly in identifying when any tropical cyclone would be and if it would make landfall, whether or not there would be any in the season or not. However, we do know tropical cyclones require warm sea surface temperatures. Above a certain threshold, 27 degrees, we get that deep convection, and they encourage the formation of these. And that's exactly what we see with the positive Indian Ocean dipole. We see warmer surface temperatures in the west, so there may well be a relation there with an increased risk. Now, of course, the tropical cyclone is more than just the sea surface temperature. The formation depends on the atmospheric composition as well, and the dynamics. If there's too much difference between the winds near the surface and height, the cyclones can get cut off. So those kind of things are not predictable. So I would leave it by saying that yes, certainly it's plausible that we would have a cyclone in the season, but we're unable to make any firm predictions about that. But certainly, ICPAC and the relevant meteorological agencies would be well placed to be providing those early warnings, which may provide at least several days, if not 1 week, ahead of their potential impacts. So yes, many thanks for the questions there.
Thank you very much, Dr. David, for your excellent and informative presentation, and also thank you very much for presenting the policy paper about avert unprecedented flood impacts, Somalia, and also scale anticipatory action now. Thank you very much. I would like to thank also our experts and participants for attending this important virtual session. I would like to thank also specifically Sheikh Khidi for his active participation, Modathir, Christoph, thank you all for your active participation and questions and the feedback. Maybe the final thing I will mention that maybe consent, I will share also the recording of this session with you all. So maybe you will expect soon also I will share the recording of this session. Thank you again very much for participating in this important virtual meeting, and maybe as soon as this white paper is published, we also share it with everyone here in this meeting. Thank you all, and bye-bye. Thank you.
Many thanks all. Thanks for your questions and your participation. Thank you.
Yes, thank you. Take care.
Thanks a lot.
Thank you so much. Thanks a lot.